This video took 4.5 weeks to produce, a total of 15 minutes and 59 seconds, to give you an immersive narration of Lao Hu's entire process of building 8 shelters over 3 months in the wild. If you can't sleep at night, then he is absolutely the miracle cure for your insomnia. A man and a dog wander on a snow-covered barren mountain. He is today's featured guest, Lao Hu. Seeing the snow falling heavier and heavier, Lao Hu simply plopped himself down under a pine tree. After catching his breath, he took out his axe and began hacking away at the lower pine branches. The branches fell to the ground like harvested chives. Although the snow outside was as thick as a quilt, it was dry underneath the pine branches. Lao Hu cleared the area, laid down a ground mat, and began to admire the snowy scenery before him. Then, he ran to a nearby forest and set his sights on rows of slender saplings. With a swing of his axe, the saplings bowed their heads in defeat. At this moment, Goubao, his dog, was like a loyal little guard, standing watch from a distance, keeping an eye on Lao Hu's every move. Afterwards, Lao Hu picked up a log and wedged it directly into the pile of branches, forming the shelter's frame. The previously chopped branches were not idle either. They were laid on the frame, becoming a roof to block the wind and snow. The weather was as cold as an ice cellar. Lao Hu quickly changed into his cold weather gear, ready to tackle these logs. He was going to build a 5-star luxury mansion in this wilderness. He even set up a simple tarp over the entrance, like a hat for the patch of snow at his doorstep, which could block some wind and snow. With that done, Lao Hu began to think about living essentials. He found a piece of bark to use as a temporary cutting board, and with a few scrapes of his knife, he shaved dry branches into wood shavings. Then, he set up his spot at the entrance, and with a single spark, the wood shavings burst into flame. The fire leaped upwards. The snow was falling really heavily, and soon a thick layer piled up around him again. As if conducting a chemistry experiment, he seasoned the wild meat. After continuous heating and waiting, Lao Hu's dinner was finally ready. He ate every last bit, soup and meat. He wanted to save some for the dog, but he had no idea where the creature had wandered off to. Full and satisfied, Lao Hu let out a burp. He tidied his sleeping area, lay down, and soon fell into a deep sleep. The next day, the snow finally stopped, but Lao Hu's shelter was buried deep. He quickly got up, put on his gear, and with the snow up to his knees, he waddled forward into the unknown like a penguin. Along the way, Lao Hu searched high and low, and finally were gathered. They became pliable in Lao Hu's hands. Just as his construction was in full swing, hail suddenly fell from the sky. Without the buffer of hair, Lao Hu had to huddle in a corner to take cover. Fortunately, after 5 minutes, the sky was clear again. Lao Hu continued his great construction project. With the frame mostly done, he began to collect lush green branches. Like laying a green carpet, he covered the roof with a thick layer. The interior was also clear with a soft grass mat. Tonight's shelter was definitely several grades higher than yesterday's. Next, he had to prepare enough firewood for the night. If nothing else, there was an abundance of firewood. He also found a log to use as a simple workbench. Once the fire was roaring, the shelter instantly felt more like a home. As for Goubao, who knew where he had run off to again, Lao Hu didn't have time to worry. He started preparing today's dinner. It was wild meat again, seasoned with his secret spices. Just by its color, it looked as good as anything from a barbecue restaurant. Perhaps Goubao smelled the aroma. He came running back, wagging his tail. Lao Hu couldn't neglect him, so he gave him some wild treats to fill his belly. Hearing the sizzling sound of the roasting meat, he calmly prepared his bed. He waited until the meat was crispy on the outside and tender on the inside before he took out his flatbread and began to feast. After the meal, there was still some residual heat from the fire. He added a few more logs to the embers to keep it providing warmth for him. A beautiful day came to a close in the warmth of the fire. When the blizzard arrives, ordinary people will choose to hide, but true adventurers know that sometimes moving forward is the only way to survive. This man and his dog are using the most primitive methods to prove the ultimate law of the contest between humanity and nature. This man is Lao Hu, who hasn't been seen for a while. He arrived in this wilderness area on the tail of the snowstorm. Moving swiftly, he had already taken out his saw. A small tree, just felled by the storm, became his target. In a few quick moves, it was brought back to the shelter. Lao Hu grabbed 3 sticks and, with a casual motion, set up a sturdy tripod. Then he placed a log between the tripod and a large tree, tied one end of a tarp to the crossbeam, and pinned the other end down firmly with packed snow. A simple but practical prototype of a shelter was complete. The snow wasn't wasted either. Lao Hu used it like bricks to completely seal the gaps on the side of the shelter. Finally, he meticulously sealed it again with branches and leaves. The small nest for him and his beloved dog was now complete. Lao Hu settled Goubao in the den and then wandered around alone with his saw. He needed to stock up on firewood. In this bone-chilling weather, a small fire was a must. He split the wood into smaller pieces to make it easier to burn. Soon, a crackling fire blossomed in front of the entrance. After walking for so long and working for half the day, his and Goubao's stomachs were rumbling like little drums. So he started to prepare today's meal. Goubao was easy to please. A single can of food was enough for a delicious meal. Lao Hu, on the other hand, prepared a meal of plain boiled noodles for himself. These noodles were really chewy. He cooked them until nightfall before he finally ate. He slurped them down, leaving not a drop of soup, which was also delicious. After warming his frozen feet, Lao Hu cozily slipped into his sleeping bag. Goubao also obediently curled up in a corner to accompany him. The fire was like a caring, warm companion, burning until the very last spark was extinguished. Just as the sky began to lighten, Lao Hu hurriedly dressed. The night had been quite tough, but Lao Hu was long used to it. After packing his gear, he headed towards the next location. From the neighboring hill, he climbed all the way to another high mountain. Lao Hu panted heavily. Although the surrounding scenery was pleasant, he was in no mood to appreciate it. Finding a large tree, he spread out his mat, needing to sit down and catch his breath first. This time, he chose a spot on a slope for his shelter. The branches overhead were so dense, they provided Lao Hu with a natural umbrella. After clearing the snow on the ground, building the roof was even simpler. He brought the lush green branches back to the shelter and wove them into the branches above. And just like that, the shelter was complete. Afterwards, he went after the saplings with his sharpened knife. With swift motions, Lao Hu felled one sapling after another. These weren't for firewood. He figured that with a view as beautiful as a wallpaper, it would be a waste not to enjoy it properly. So, after a bit of clanging and banging, he built a leisure bench. Sitting on it was incredibly relaxing and comfortable. Next, he fashioned a small stove from a tree stump. Although he hadn't stopped since he arrived, his body was still cold as ice, so he put on a thick coat. When he returned, he quickly lit the small stove and finally felt a long-lost warmth. Famished, he skewered a piece of meat on a stick and, like throwing a dart, thrust the skewer into the stove. Under the high heat, the aroma of meat soon began to sizzle out. After a few minutes of
already dressed and ready to welcome the new day. The snow had been falling all night, and the small tent had completely blended into the landscape. He took a small pot and collected the freshest snow. Cuddled by the stove's fire, it would soon turn into sweet drinking water. Once the water boiled, he tossed in a packet of 82 coffee. Then, in the cleared space, he placed an iron pot. Wild eggs, already beaten, were poured into the pot and quickly scrambled into golden yellow eggs. Although scrambled eggs are a common dish, enjoying them against such a snowy backdrop was a unique experience. Just after he finished breakfast, the snow began to fall even harder. Old Lee's heart skipped a beat. He felt something was wrong, so he quickly packed his bags, ready to run. With the warmth from his recent meal, his movements were incredibly fast. The tent was quickly stuffed into his backpack. Once everything was packed, he set off for the next unknown destination without a backward glance. In the deep forests of Freljord, Old Lee pulled a large load of belongings like an old ox. The snow, which came up to his thighs, made things even worse. Finally, in a relatively open area, he took out his gear. He used a long tool to measure the snow's depth. He hadn't expected it. The snow was 2.25 meters deep, only a little shorter than Yao Ming. Even the trees were laden with snow, on the verge of collapsing. Afterwards, Old Lee quickly got to work. This was a new tent he had recently acquired, with a huge amount of space. Besides the amazing space, it was also exceptionally easy to set up. Having just measured the snow depth, he decided to fully develop this fertile ground to build a safer and warmer shelter. First, he dug a boundary according to the size of the tent, then shoveled the snow out, one scoop at a time. Luckily, it was soft and light snow. If it had been hard soil, Old Lee estimated he'd be digging until the next century. Even so, this ice pit, about 1.2 meters deep, took a full 3 hours to complete. Next, the huge tent needed to be stretched over the deep pit, covering it perfectly. A castle-like shelter took shape. For those who have built many shelters, they know that such a ceiling height, he had to extend the chimney so it could smoothly reach the roof. By the time he was done, it was already 5 o'clock. Old Lee realized he had to act quickly. A small, dead tree became his target. Although it took some effort to saw it down, its intricate branches were tangled together, making it difficult to pull free. He finally managed to carry it to the shelter before dark. The biting cold of the night made Old Lee shiver. He had to grit his teeth and persevere. Just sawing it into small sections wasn't enough. He also had to split them into smaller pieces. Everyone yearns for the freedom of outdoor camping, but the hardships are unavoidable. After stacking the firewood properly, he closed the shelter's door. It was a double-layered tent, so it was hard to imagine how warm it would be once the stove was lit inside. In such an airtight space, Old Lee dared not be careless. Carbon monoxide poisoning was no joke, so he always carried a detector, keeping a constant eye on the air quality inside. The fire in the stove burned brightly. Feeling the heat, he took off his thick coat. Various ingredients were already mixed in the pot. His cooking skills looked impressive. For those of you still awake, how about getting up for a late night snack? After a full meal, it was time for a good night's sleep. With so many layers of bedding, even without the warmth of the stove, he wouldn't feel a hint of cold. The next day, the stove was still chugging away. Outside, the snow continued to fall. After one night, Old Lee's shelter was safe and sound. By now, he had already brewed himself a fragrant cup of coffee. After being cooped up all night, he could finally come out for some fresh air. But it was also time to pack up and head to the next location. They say it's better to share joy than to enjoy it alone. This time, Old Lee brought his girlfriend, Xiao Mai, into the snowy woods. Wilderness survival isn't exclusive to men. Women can also hold up half the sky. Pitching the tent, setting up camp, Xiao Mai was quick and efficient, not hesitating at all. The falling snow added a romantic filter to the young couple. After all the windproof ropes were tightened and secured, Old Lee used snow to tightly seal the perimeter of the camp. These two worked fast. In just a few moves, their little shelter was complete. Next, they had to venture deep into the snowy forest to find firewood for warmth. Dry trees were always the first choice. Not only does it protect the green forest, but dry wood is also much easier to burn. Crucially, it's also light. Even Xiao Mai could carry it and run. Old Lee had intended to handle the rest of the work himself, but Xiao Mai insisted on helping. The sight made Old Lee keep his distance, continued his lonely walk in an unknown wilderness. They say, the bigger the storm, the more valuable the fish. This guy loved to wander out when the wind and snow were at their strongest. Despite the lush trees around, the temperature here was pitifully low. So Old Lee decided not to carry his heavy load any further. He chose a clearing and prepared to set up camp. Many fallen trees nearby reminded him that the weather here was unpredictable and harsh. But Old Lee didn't pay them any mind. He skillfully unfolded his camping tent. Once the windproof ropes were pulled and the stakes were hammered into the ground, it was as stable as a mountain. Although the interior wasn't large, once he assembled the small stove and extended the chimney outside the tent, he could enjoy spring-like warmth, even with the biting wind outside. Of course, before that, he had to take out his ancestral saw. The fallen trees in the vicinity became his targets. He chose a few sturdy ones and dragged them back to his campsite. Then, he processed them. The scenery here was truly nice. Besides the vast forest, there was a large river flowing nearby. It was just that the biting wind made it hard for Old Lee to open his eyes. He had to speed up his work. Through his efforts, the prepared firewood was piled up inside the shelter. Afterwards, he went to the river to fetch some of life's source. Without stopping, he went back into the shelter. Old Lee had seen many grand scenes in the wild, but the current gale still made him a bit nervous. He quickly lit a small flame to calm his uneasy heart. Then, he closed the shelter's main door. He wouldn't care if the sky fell outside. With fire, he could prepare some food to fill his stomach. He reheated some fries he had made at home, and then stir-fried some onions and sliced meat. Although it didn't look amazing, it didn't stop Old Lee from eating with great relish. After eating his fill, he dived into his sleeping bag and slept soundly, like a silkworm. When he woke up the next day, he began to dismantle the shelter he had stayed in for a night. This guy was always eager for new challenges. After packing up, he strode towards the next location. Walking along, Old Lee plunged deep into the forest. The snow, which came up to his waist, made every step difficult. To save some energy, he spotted a clearing and decided to set up camp on the spot. Old Lee first stomped around vigorously, packing the soft snow until it was as solid as a concrete floor. After marking out his own little territory, it was time for the tent, lifesaver in the cold winter. Then, he discovered some wild firewood on the trees, but unfortunately, It wasn't enough to last the night. Before it got completely dark, he busied himself for a while and collected a lot of firewood. This time, the small stove was large enough. It was stuffed full of wood. Once the small flame was lit, the shelter slowly warmed up. On this trip, he brought a new gadget, a small device that could measure wind speed and temperature. Old Lee placed it in front of the door, where it looked like a guard standing watch for him. By now, the indoor temperature had risen above zero. A heat-powered fan was placed on the stove. This way, the indoor heat could circulate better. Once everything was ready, Old Lee began to prepare his dinner for the day. Spaghetti with vegetables and sausage. Tonight's dinner looked much more appetizing. With some toasted bread, Old Lee ate heartily. After preparing his bed, it was time to say goodnight to everyone. The heat from the stove continued to radiate. When he woke up the next day, the outside was a vast expanse of white. Everything was quiet. Because he accidentally woke up late, he didn't have time for breakfast and quickly packed his gear to head back. Otherwise, he would miss the number 2 bus home.